The post was about how LLM dependence is breaking. They checked whether people could accurately quote a passage, but when they actually measured it, they were 19%. It's about whether you can still design things with.
I can't remember at all where anything is in the code I wrote with Claude last week. I'm the one who wrote it, but I can't explain it without reading through it again.
That's basically the same story as that post on Reddit with over 600 upvotes.
Wait, that many people related to it.
It's in r/ExperiencedDevs, a community for experienced developers. The post was about how LLM dependence is breaking people's mental models. The comments were things like the more you offload, the less real understanding you have. And even when I review it, trying to recall it later feels like I can't see straight.
Oh, that's exactly Sharina's situation right now.
The poster pointed out this pattern of just one more question. You end up asking the LLM before you've really thought it through yourself, so your thinking gets externalized.
Ask before researching, ask before writing, ask before trying it myself. That's literally me.
Though this isn't just a simple case of bashing AI. There were pushback comments too. Like there's work I couldn't even attempt without an LLM. And a lot of people landed on it really being about how you use it. Ever have an idea suddenly hit you while you're on a walk or in the shower?
Oh, all the time. I'm thinking about something completely unrelated, and then a solution just pops into my head.
Right? That's your brain processing it in the background on its own. There's a brain network called the default mode network, DMN for short. It activates when you're not focused on a task. So when you're bored, or your mind's wandering,
It's kind of strange that it works when you're not concentrating.
you just don't notice it. But your brain is organizing information on its own. This is what's called the incubation effect. Once you let a problem sit for a while, insight tends to come more easily afterward.
So that's why an idea suddenly hits when you go for a walk after getting stuck.
Here's the thing. The DMN can only work with information you've actually digested yourself.
Information I've digested myself?
Meaning stuff you thought through, struggled with, and actually took in on your own. Information you just received from AI doesn't mature no matter how long you let it sit. Your brain doesn't recognize it as your own material, so it never becomes something to process.
That's why code Claude wrote for me never sticks in my head.
There's also that Reddit comment about ideas not coming during breaks anymore. I think that's because the seeds you're feeding the DMN, the material you actually thought through yourself, are drying up. This phenomenon was actually studied back in 2011. It's called the Google effect.
Google effect.
Information you assume you can just look up later. Your brain stops bothering to remember. Instead, it only remembers where you saved it.
Same as how I stopped remembering phone numbers once I started saving contacts on my phone.
Exactly. And there was an interesting finding in that research too. Apparently when people hit a hard problem, they unconsciously think of a computer first.
So search first when stuck is basically baked into our brains.
Right? And LLM are accelerating that even further. With search, you still had to figure out how to search for something yourself. But with an LLM, you just ask and get an answer back. Even that step is gone now.
So what's left isn't the actual code, just I can ask Claude.
There was a Reddit comment saying the same thing that happens with phone numbers is now happening with code. MIT Media Lab actually measured this in an experiment, a study where they had participants write essays and measured their brainwaves. They compared 3 groups, one using an LLM, one using a search engine, and one working entirely on their own.
What can brainwaves even tell you?
How well different brain regions are coordinating with each other. Basically, the strength of the neural network connections. The self-reliant group had the strongest connectivity, the search group came next, and the LLM group was the weakest.
Wait, so the LLM group had weaker brain connectivity than even the search group?
What's even more interesting is the test they gave after the essay writing. They checked whether people could accurately quote a passage from their own essay, and the LLM group did the worst.
Wait, so they couldn't remember something they wrote themselves?
Right? And the sense of this is my own work was also lowest in the LLM group.
They wrote it themselves, but don't feel like it's actually theirs.
The researchers named this cognitive debt. It's like borrowing against your cognitive ability in exchange for convenience.
Kind of like technical debt, you eventually have to pay it back.
Though keep in mind this is still a preprint, so it hasn't been peer-reviewed yet. Microsoft and CMU actually ran a much bigger study on this. They looked at 319 knowledge workers and analyzed over 900 real work cases.
So this one's actual on-the-job work, not brain scans.
Right, and the results are pretty telling. The more people trusted AI, the less critical thinking they showed.
So trusting it means you stop questioning it.
Exactly, you end up just accepting the output as is. On the flip side, people confident in their own skills kept their critical thinking intact.
So if you feel like you can judge it yourself, you don't just take it at face value.
The study also points out that the whole center of gravity of the work has shifted, from gathering information to verifying information, and from doing it yourself to supervising the AI.
So the role's shifting from doer to reviewer.
But doing that supervisor role properly still requires critical thinking. There's a research org called Meta that actually measured developer productivity directly. They had 16 experienced open source developers do tasks both with and without AI.
So they randomized it and compared the two.
Right, they randomized and measured across 246 tasks. Now here's the part I want you to focus on. The developers' own predictions beforehand. They expected AI would make them 24% faster.
Well, that sounds about right, honestly.
Even after finishing the tasks, their subjective sense was that they'd been 20% faster, but when they actually measured it, they were 19% slower.
Wait, they felt faster, but they were actually slower.
The gap between perception and actual measurement was about 39 points.
So your own gut feeling really can't be trusted at all, huh?
That said, the researchers later put out a statement acknowledging the methodology's limitations. So you can't flatly say AI slows you down. But the gap between perception and actual measurement is real. There's a phrase that got a lot of traction on Reddit. Have you heard of manager brain?
Manager brain? I already have a bad feeling about this.
It's the idea that interacting with an LLM starts to feel like a manager and report relationship. You give instructions like implement this or look into that, and just receive the finished output.
Yeah, I do kind of feel like I'm just giving instructions instead of actually doing the work myself.
Managers tend to forget the implementation details over time, right? The same thing happens if you keep offloading everything to an LLM.
So your technical understanding just shrinks.
Exactly. Someone in the comments called it a black hole for the brain. Even if you review something carefully, when you try to recall it later, nothing's left.
That feeling of reading it, but it just gets sucked in and disappears. I know that feeling.
Someone else said they can still remember code they wrote a long time ago. But code they wrote with Claude last month just doesn't stick. Same as code they only reviewed.
Whether you wrote it yourself or handed it off really changes how it sticks in your brain.
Based on everything so far, let's check if you're showing any of these symptoms yourself. If you combine the research with the Reddit comments, there are a few signs to watch for. First, you can't explain your own code without rereading it.
Okay, that one hits way too close to home already.
Next, you can't recall the structure of a module you worked on just a few weeks ago. It's that state where you can't track in your head where anything is anymore.
I probably couldn't remember the API endpoints I built last month without opening the file.
Third, solutions stop popping into your head while you're out walking or in the shower.
Yeah, lately even when I space out, nothing comes to me.
I think that's because you're feeding less material into your DMN. So there's nothing left for it to process. And last, you ask just one more question before even trying it yourself.
The moment an error shows up, I paste it straight into Claude. I don't even try to troubleshoot it myself anymore.
That MIT study we mentioned also had some hopeful results, actually.
Hopeful? I thought it was all about weaker brain connectivity.
That's true for the group that outsourced everything from the start. But there was another group. A group that wrote their own draft first, then brought in the LLM afterward. That group showed stronger memory recall and higher prefrontal cortex activation.
Just changing the order makes that much of a difference.
It's the difference between whether the material got encoded as yours before AI ever touched it. What I try to do is spend the first 10 minutes thinking it through myself. It doesn't have to be finished. A rough outline, a first pass, that's enough.
So you don't need to write it perfectly from scratch.
Right. AI is more of a copy editor than a designer. When you design it yourself first and then hand it to AI, you can actually judge whether the output is good.
Yeah, if you just take whatever it gives you without thinking, you can't even tell if it's right.
Microsoft's research said the same thing. The phase where you supervise, the AI output is the important part. You verify it, and you decide yourself whether to accept it or reject it.
So it's not about being a worker, it's about actually being the supervisor.
Someone on Reddit's been doing this thing they call an AI detox sprint.
Detox? Like setting aside time without the LLM?
Yeah, every so often, you code for a few hours with no LLM allowed. Some people were doing it in 6 to 8 hour blocks.
8 hours? That sounds like it'd start out painfully slow.
It's fine if it's slow. The point isn't the output, it's brain strength training. Same as a muscle you stop using, if you stop thinking for yourself, that gets weaker too.
So you set aside time to write things yourself regularly, just to keep the feel for it.
There's another approach too. Treating AI like a junior engineer.
Treating it like a junior?
You keep the mindset of reading its output like code, written by a coworker. Question whether it's correct, check the intent, and rewrite it if you need to.
So you look at AI output with the same eyes you'd use for a code review.
There's one more approach, what people call Socratic mode. You don't let the AI give you the answer, you use it to quiz yourself instead. Question style.
So instead of getting the answer, you get hints and you work it out yourself.
Right? Instead of teach me this, you ask, is my understanding of this correct? You go through the thinking process yourself, so it sticks in your brain better. For the DMN to kick in, you need low load time, like walking or a shower. Times when your brain isn't that busy.
I usually listen to a podcast while I walk. Is that still okay?
That actually weakens the effect. Once information's coming in through your ears, your brain gets used up processing that instead.
So even though I'm out walking, the DMN doesn't get any room to work.
Same with commute time on the train. If you fill it with your phone, you lose that empty time entirely.
I've been filling every idle moment with content.
Which is why, ironically, it helps to actually schedule in some boredom.
Scheduling boredom sounds like a weird idea.
The trick is to load the problem into your head before you step away from it. Get the thing you want to think through in mind first, then deliberately step into that empty time.
So you hand the brain a prompt, and then let it run in the background?
What we talked about today isn't really about whether AI makes you faster or slower. It's about whether you can still design things with your own head 10 years from now.
So it's not about speed, it's about the brain itself.
New tools come out every year, and you can just switch to whichever one. But you've only got one brain, and you can't swap that out.
So it's either train it or let it decline, one or the other.
My rule is simple. Design, naming, and logic. I do myself. Routine stuff, looking up an API, that's fine to hand off to AI.
So the thinking part is yours, and the labor part gets delegated. That's the line.
In the end, how you use it is a choice only you can make.
Starting today, Sharina's going to try thinking things through herself for at least 10 minutes first.
That alone can change what your brain looks like 10 years from now.